International trade determining absolute and comparative advantage. So some important terms that deal with international trade is a trade deficit when imports exceed exports, which means we're bringing in more than we are sending out in the global economy. You have a trade surplus when we are sending out more products than we are bringing in. I've listed the main U.S. exports and imports for you to look at. A couple of things that are important to note is that Canada is the largest quantitative trading partner with the U.S. It makes sense that Canada is number one because we have the North American Free Trade Agreement, and not surprisingly, Mexico is our second largest trading partner as well. The last time I looked at the statistic, China was sitting at number 4 in terms of volume of trade with the U.S. We have a large trade deficit with China, and our dependence on foreign oil is reflected in our trade with OPEC nations, and we in the United States lead the world in combined exports and imports measured in dollars. So why do nations trade? Because it increases the productivity of a nation's resources. When we think back to the PPC or the PPF, one of the ways that we could expand our production possibilities frontier was through international trade. Specialization in trade results in greater overall output and income for both nations. If both nations don't benefit, they're not going to be interested in trading. So how do we determine the absolute and comparative advantage? Absolute advantage is numerically when one country produces a larger quantity of one product than others. So if we look at this example, Mexico is represented in their production possibilities for producing avocados and soybeans are represented by this sort of yellow mustard colored box. And then the United States production possibilities for avocados and soybeans is represented by this green production possibilities box. So if we look here, Mexico has a maximum production level of 60 tons of avocados, whereas the United States has a maximum production level of 90 tons. That means that the absolute advantage belongs to the United States in terms of avocado production. That doesn't mean that the comparative advantage belongs to the United States. So if we look over here at soybeans, Mexico can produce a maximum of 15 tons of soybeans, and the United States can produce 30 tons of soybeans. So again, the absolute advantage belongs to the United States. But it is possible that both nations would gain from trade if they decided to specialize in trade. So how we look at this, each nation is going to specialize in the production of one particular product. So we look over here at their maximum production levels. And Mexico can produce at maximum 60 tons of avocados and 15 tons of soybeans. So if we reduce that down by common denominators, what we see is that 1 ton of soybeans requires Mexico to sacrifice 4 tons of avocados, because you can divide 60 and 15. 15 will go into 64 times, basically. And so if we want to figure out, so if 1 ton of soybeans costs 4 tons of avocados, we want to figure out how much soybeans are cost by the production of 1 ton of avocados. So we divide everything by 4. We get 1 ton of avocados cost 1/4 a ton of soybeans. So it seems like Mexico should probably produce avocados, but we have to go look at the production possibilities in the United States. So if the U.S. can produce a maximum of 90 tons of avocados and 30 tons of soybeans, we reduce that down. Each is divisible by 30. So we have 1 ton of soybeans cost 3 tons of avocados, whereas we divide everything by 3 to figure out 1 ton of avocados cost 1/3 a ton of soybeans. 1/3 is larger than 1/4, so Mexico should produce avocados and the United States should produce soybeans. And since we figured out that Mexico can produce 4 tons of avocados for 1 ton of soybeans, and the U.S. can produce 3 tons of avocados for 1 ton of soybeans, we have to have terms of trade which will benefit both nations that are in between a 1-to-3 ratio for soybeans to avocados and 1-to-4 ratio for soybeans to avocados. So to make it as simple as possible through negotiation, the two nations decide to trade 1 ton of soybeans for 3.5 tons of avocados. Both nations benefit. So when we look at this chart that shows us the gains from specialization in trade, when we go back to the production possibilities curve, we talked about a point called allocative efficiency, and it's the maximum production of both products, capital and consumer goods, that an economy could produce while producing both of them. Most of the time, allocative efficiency, when you're looking at absolute comparative advantage, is just given to you. So if we go back here to our original points, we see that point C is the allocative efficiency. So if Mexico, column 1, represents Mexico and the United States production levels at allocative efficiency, which is point C on their production possibilities chart. Point C will not always be allocative efficiency. You're going to have to be given that in the problem. So if you look over here at column 2 represents the different products that each country is going to produce if they decide to trade. So Mexico will produce 60 tons of avocados, and the United States will produce 30 tons of soybeans. The U.S. will not produce avocados, and the U.S. and Mexico will not produce soybeans. So if we're going to trade, we have a 1 to 3.5 ratio. So if the U.S. is going to send 10 tons of soybeans to Mexico, then that means Mexico would have to send 35 tons of avocados to the U.S. Those numbers were determined. I just said we were going to send 10 tons of soybeans because the United States has to have some sort of benefit from trade. If they can make 19 tons of soybeans on their own, they're not going to be willing to trade for less than 19 tons of soybeans to have. So if they can produce 30 on their own, 1 times 10 tons of soybeans, 30, this is the quantity they can produce if they specialize. They're going to send 10 to Mexico, so we're going to subtract 10 from the quantity of soybeans available in the U.S., and that gives us a total of 20 tons of soybeans available. We have no avocados in the U.S., but because 1 times 10 is 10, 10 times 3.5 is 35, so we're going to gain 35 tons of avocados from Mexico in trade, so we'll have 35 tons of avocados. So column 2 represents the production levels of each good with specialization. Column 3 represents what will be imported and exported as a result of the terms of trade. Column 4 represents the quantities of both products available in each nation after trade. And then column 5 represents gains from trade. How do we figure out the gains from trade? This is the quantity of avocados available in the U.S. after trade. Allocative efficiency, they could make 33 tons. So 35, subtract 33, you have an additional gain of 2 tons of avocados. 20 tons of soybeans minus 19, what they can make on their own, gives us 1 ton gain of soybeans. The same thing happens in Mexico. So Mexico makes 60 tons of avocado. They send 35 tons to the U.S. So 60 minus 35 gives them 25 tons of avocados available in Mexico after a trade. They make no soybeans. They gain 10 tons of soybeans from the U.S. in trade. So they have 10 tons of soybeans available. 10 minus 9, 1 ton of soybean benefit. 25 tons of avocados minus 24, what they can produce on their own, gives us a 1 ton gain of avocados in Mexico. Resources are not allocated equitably across the planet, and so each nation has gained. Each nation will not necessarily gain the exact same amount, but each nation has gained, or Mexico and the United States would not have decided to make this trade. So let's look at your homework and do some practice.